This is Negotiate X TV.
Hello and welcome to the Negotiate X podcast. I am your co-host and co-founder, Nolan Martin. With me today is my good friend, co-host, co-founder, Aram Donigian. And Aram, you want to introduce today's guest?
Yeah, I will, Nolan. And it's great because now I'm going to be the old man on the show as we have you and our guest, two youngsters, as we like to say, but certainly two professionals in this field. So our guest today is Max Bevilacqua. And I really hope I said that right, Max. I know you are so gracious, just like I am with my name. Max is the Chief Negotiating Officer of Max Negotiating, a negotiation advisory and training company supporting cyber, humanitarian, and environmental negotiations. Prior to Max Negotiating, Max advised and trained Fortune 100 executives, business development teams, and U.S. Special Forces as a senior trainer at Vantage Partners, and that's where Max and I first met. Max has joined the teaching team of Harvard Law School's Winter Negotiation Workshop, the Program on Negotiation, Spring Mediation and Conflict Resolution Seminar, Harvard Negotiation Institute's Summer Workshop, and Pond's Executive Education Masterclass. He also teaches negotiations at Boston University's Questrom School of Business. Max served as the executive director of In Good Faith, an international nonprofit which translated Eli Wiesel's Night into Bahasa, Indonesia, and led interfaith programming amongst universities in the U.S. and Indonesia. He received a Fulbright scholarship to Central Java and currently sits on the board of Planet Indonesia. Max holds a master's degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, where he studied international negotiation and conflict resolution, and received his bachelor's from Wesleyan University in religious studies. Max, thanks for joining us today.
Wow, this is a lot to live up to. Thank you so much for that generous honorary introduction. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
All right, Max. So to kick things off, I always like to talk about the journey of how you got to this spot, how you become a professional negotiator. And so what was it like for you along the way, and what were some key milestones?
Negotiators are forged in the family crucible. So I have an Italian self-proclaimed blue-collar father and an Ashkenazi Jewish mother from New York. And I grew up in a household that required understanding implicit messages, silences, body languages, and a hyper-awareness. So I think, to be blunt, it comes from the family. And I think that needs to be talked about. Like, there's a saying that I really like, that there are no individuals, only fragments of families. So I think to understand yourself as a negotiator, you have to be looking at your family, and your deepest and most richest and most painful work is within your family. So I would say my journey has everything to do with my first colleague, my brother, and my first employers, my parents.
Yeah, that's powerful? And I know we'll get to one of our final questions we often ask is around how these things show up in our personal lives. That's a really powerful piece for all of us to think about, how our skills, or even the skills, I guess, of, for me as a parent, our kids are starting to show up. Max, to that, did you, as a child growing up in this kind of dynamic household, were there skills you were learning then, or did you piece that together later on, like in the way?
Great question. I mean, I think so we're always learning, so I won't call it a failure, but I think I struggled to name phenomena and dynamics and moves in my family. And I would kind of deal with the emotional fallout of it, but not be able to put words to it. So it took me decades to put words to what was happening and to understand the dynamic, both interpersonally and at a systems level. Because the other idea of the family is that, we talk about interest-based negotiation, and the presumption in like a very legal-oriented, hyper-Western world is everyone has individual interests, which is true, but you also have group interests relative to your family. People engage in maladaptive behaviors for the preservation of the larger organism or the group. And otherwise, that doesn't make sense from an individual interest perspective. So I think I reflected on what I perceive to be my shortcomings and lack of effectiveness within my family. And I've been piecing it together ever since, and, still working on it.
Like all of us, it is a journey where we're progressing. So you're in the field pretty deeply. One of the reasons I was excited to have you on the program is I just know your passion for the topic and the passion for helping others. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of really, I guess, broad or long-term goals? What are you hoping to accomplish? What drives you in the work that you're currently doing? I know we're going to get into it in a little more detail, but what's your drive here?
Well, I don't know what gave you the impression that I care about other people. I'm really in this for myself.
Not at all true. Don't even plant that.
No, but what I will say is I think people are bashful, at least in my experience, and we'll talk about our students, bashful about saying what they want. And I'm not going to pretend that I don't want to be able to have conversations like this, to talk to impressive gentlemen and women and others like yourselves. And that I don't want to have a nice log cabin on a lake with a dog in a yard. I'd like that. The reason that I'm motivated to go through the slog and grind of kind of going out on your own has everything to do with what negotiation did for me. And we can go as deep or as shallow as you like. But another part of my personal journey was I started school at Georgetown, and I was dating someone who threatened to kill themselves. And I did not know how to handle that. And even though, thank God, this person did not, the fallout of that negotiation was something I was deeply unprepared for in terms of what did I agree to, right? So I see negotiations as anthropological phenomena, which is a fancy way of saying the thing that humans do when they're pursuing what they want. And if someone says that they don't want something, referencing what I was mentioning earlier, they're full of shit. Of course you want something. You'd prefer to survive. You'd prefer not to have someone's, foot on your neck. You'd prefer a lot of these things, and that can be metaphorical and psychological as well. But I think the illusion that we ought to be embarrassed about what we want is part of this. We don't have to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but I think like evangelical Christian sense of sin around desire. So sorry, that was throwing a bunch at you there, but I see negotiations happening all the time. And I think the thing that bothers me and motivates me, aside from the fact that I know how much mentally and emotionally I'm better off I am and what that could do for other people. Cause ultimately the musician plays a musical instrument, the negotiator plays themselves. So you're needing to look at yourself and tune yourself. And so it's, very self-involved in that sense. But also when I look at the way people negotiate and how destructive it is, it's painful, right? We talk about Pareto optimality and wasted value. Watching people not even reach that kind of like fixed line midpoint, it's painful to watch, and you can appreciate how hard it is when you are the person in that. And so I'm not saying or presuming that any of us can really always do that much better in that seat, but like, damn, involve a third party so you can like get some executive like functioning in there so that we don't waste so damn much.
I would assume, Nolan, that resonates with part of our entire drive for starting Negotiate X is just to see others do better. And it really based in the kind of the recognition of the impact this work has had in our own lives. And in teachers and influencers who have shaped our thinking, right? And that there's absolutely nothing wrong with having desires and dreams that we are pursuing. Where we get in our way is our process for asking for those things or creating the environment where those things are possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of want to shift gears here, Max, and talk about Max Negotiating, and specifically the work you do around cyber, humanitarian, and environmental. Where do negotiations kind of fit into these industries, and what kind of advice do you help companies work through?
Sure. We're seeing that humanitarian organizations are now needing to become managers of digital supply chains. So this kind of relates to the cyber work a little bit. The ICRC hack brought that up. So if, you have these international organizations that are collecting sensitive data, especially biometric data, and, that's online, you now find that along with tech partners and host governments, that INGOs are engaging in a set of activities that they may not be innately trained to do in some way, or it's not their native capacity to manage a digital supply chain, and that's becoming relevant. So there's this whole piece that, I'm very inspired by, and if it's unclear, Roger Fisher and the dynasty, and, I followed Bruce Patton to Vantage, and there's some great negotiating humanitarian access work done by, I think, Mark Gordon via Mercy Corps, and I think Joe Bubman was working on that as well. That's the kind of stuff that I'm aspirationally looking to do. And then I think you have this idea, whereas we think about negotiation as what do you say at the table? As, okay, let's take a step back. We're not at a table. We're at a whiteboard and we're looking at the stakeholder map of who influences who and how to do this and ways to make the status quo less tenable for people that are benefiting from it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think with regards to humanitarian work, it's still a work in progress. And right now it's been mostly related to misinformation, disinformation, as well as data security, which, I don't identify as naturally as a tech person. I mean, like, yeah, I played StarCraft and like Magic the Gathering. So like, I'm not pretending like I was captain of the football team here, but yeah, we're in a new playing field. And frankly, one of the reasons for going out on my own has a lot to do with keeping up. I think I'm not particularly shy about saying that for all the good that lawyers have done to the material in terms of making it marketable to corporations and even instituting it in large scale peace negotiations, Ecuador, Peru, Israel, Egypt, et cetera, it's not the most efficient organization in terms of propagating negotiation material from my perspective. And so for me, a big piece of that is, if I want something fixed on my computer, I'm not like, okay, who's my best lawyer friend here, right? That's not who I'm calling. So I think that there is this tension, at least that I feel, between honoring the past and the legacy of Fisher and PON and moving forward, which I think can be difficult. And look, I understand running a business requires people in it that are risk averse. But when you have cybercrime and the battlefield has moved, we have to move with it. So there's a piece of that there. And speaking of military, or at least I was thinking of it, my environmental negotiations also include the military. So there's an amazing organization called Earth Justice.
So kind of want to shift gears here, Max, and talk about Max Negotiating, and specifically the work you do around cyber, humanitarian, and environmental.
And so I enjoy
where do negotiations kind of fit into these industries,
and sometimes those
what
negotiations
kind of advice do you help companies work through?
And other governments as well. So, I think the playing field has not only expanded to a digital space, but it's inherently interdisciplinary. It's public, it's private, it's all of these things, whether we like it or not. And so again, my thought is that the firms of the future or the organizations of the future, Max Negotiating, Negotiate X, et cetera, they are necessary and needed. And I like, from at least what I can tell, and I'm so grateful to be invited on your show, but from what I can tell in terms of this next generation, Aram, which you're a part of still, this next generation, but you are, because you're here and we're talking about it. There seems to be an evolution of the norms here, which is not like, this is my IP, right? It's, let's build on this. If we actually care what we're doing, if we actually care about what we say we care about, and if the idea is to have a network effect where the more people who understand this strategy, the better, why are we sitting on it, right? Is it only for people that can afford to go to grad school or who served, right? No, everyone's negotiating in an impactful way. And they could be the person negotiating with you. And a lot of times you might wish that the person you're negotiating with had taken a course with one of you gentlemen.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? It's nice to negotiate with someone who's well trained and even well prepared. It helps shift the negotiation a little
Imagine
bit.
that.
Can you say a little bit more about kind of cyber negotiations and the work you do there? I think you talked a little humanitarian, a little about the environmental. Just for our listeners who are they've probably heard about a hack. They've heard about just paying the bribe to get re-access. Where's the negotiation opportunities that you're seeing?
Such a good question. The short answer is there is a classically understood negotiation that mirrors ransom, when someone has something that you need and they're making a demand and you're trying to pay less. So it's a damage mitigating situation. And that's where Max Negotiating is very, very lucky to be partnered with GroupSense, which is run by Curtis Minder, who is someone who was featured in the New Yorker. And I read an article about him negotiating with threat actors. And I literally just emailed him. I was like, this is so cool. I have no experience here, but I theoretically have some understanding. I'd love to get involved. And we've been working together for the past few years. That means that I'm reading transcripts and I wouldn't say quarterbacking, but like one of the people in the huddle in terms of what do we do next? What does our time look like, et cetera, et cetera. But from my perspective, this is a very narrow-minded way of looking at the negotiations in the space, because at the point at which the threat actor has already taken your data, we're just, you're on the ground covering your head trying not to die, right? You're trying to survive. You've already lost. So from my perspective, the more interesting stuff that I've been starting to work on is looking at the larger scope of things. And I'm not saying that I don't know what the intergovernmental negotiations are like in terms of getting extradition treaties, but that's the level of things we need to be talking about. I have a ton of respect for the FBI. And again, per, kind of legal and tech and the personalities that go into government versus private sector, they're not going to help you get your stuff back on their own, right? Like, we need cooperation and data sharing. And I think you gentlemen probably know a lot more about this than I. But yeah, broadly speaking, we're being inefficient. And I do think it's problematic for your business owner that your government can't give you recourse or protection. And then we shouldn't be surprised when people pay so that their businesses can survive, because that is in their interest and that's rational. But then you also can't blame someone in a country, or maybe you can, but it's attractive for people in a country that won't extradite them to engage in something that's highly lucrative and that is normalized as a regular organization that might even have healthcare that as a job and is called a business transaction. So I'd love to look at the larger picture, because I don't want to keep doing these haggling down scenarios because we've already lost at that.
Now, the extradition sort of stuff seems, I don't know if this is right, kind of right of bang, like it's falling, or do you see that as kind of left before? And is there more stuff from a negotiation perspective and framing the environment that should be being done prior to bang, right? Because I get what you're saying. Once this event has occurred with a threat actor,
yeah,
now you're just trying to salvage. Yeah. So is there more to left of bang that needs to be being done as you dig into this work?
I think, and again, I just want to acknowledge that I'm, out of my depth here. I don't know, right? And I think there needs to be a lot of humility here with people that are approaching it to say, like, look, from my small little perspective, here's what it looks like. What are you seeing? So I think it looks like a private-public partnership. Something that has always stuck out for me, blast from the past, and again, a lot of respect for armed service, who I often prefer to work with, as well as the law. I'm thinking about a chart that I saw in a social network analysis class at Fletcher that showed the two masterminds of 9/11 and the idea that in certain parts of the government, there's an understanding that these were the doors we should be knocking on, but it wasn't shared, right? So the idea wasn't necessarily that there was no intelligence; there wasn't smart intelligence sharing. And look, I know there are levels of sensitivity with information, but there are also politics that I think are inefficient. And I don't mind saying when they're inefficient, because if we care about efficiency as negotiators, I see negotiators as people that are optimizing the allocation of resources, because that's our time, that's our energy. That's why sometimes we say, walk away. It's not worth your time or your energy, right? So if we're trying to be efficient with resources, I don't think we're doing a good job. And so I assume left of bang, there's some information sharing. There's some, hey, I know that we can't attract really brilliant people in the private sector to come work for like 1/10 of the pay and a different environment. Let's partner with them to some degree, or at least listen to them. But I have to assume that a lot of this just has to do with the culture of government, which I'm a bit cynical about.
Yeah. I believe you just finished your first semester teaching at BU. Is that how did it go?
With thanks to your help, Aram, and support and other people who've done it before, it made it a lot easier. It feels very surreal because in a business school, and especially BU, it feels like very traditional and hierarchical. Like my classroom looks like one of these like 18th century surgeon theaters, where everyone's around and they're looking to you as the source of knowledge and information. And my first job is to be like, I don't know shit. Like, I know some things, I know some good principles, I know what not to do. I can coach you. I have, stories for you. But generally speaking, my goal is to put myself on the side of the room and then point towards the front of the room where there's negotiation stuff that's broader than all of us, which I'm not always engaging skillfully in, right? And to help them notice that. So I enjoyed it. I had undergrads in BU's business school, lovely, vibrant kids. And also kids are really stressed these days. and they care about grades tremendously, no matter how hard you try and not make that the main factor.
Right.
There's an assignment that I really enjoy that I think I shared with you. I think, I'm also trying to figure out how to attribute things correctly. I think it comes from Moshe Cohen, but this is part of the other work of Max Negotiating, is trying to like find the threads and be like, okay, where did this come from and how can we give credit properly?
Yeah.
But there's an assignment called, because I was struggling with how grade obsessed students were, and, the degree to which they weren't tolerating uncertainty very well, which is kind of part of negotiating. And so I gave them an assignment that I believe everyone should give, which is to collect 8 no's, to get 5 no's on behalf of something you're asking for and 3 on behalf of someone else. And what that does is it makes you ask and makes you hear no, which is scary for those who are rejection sensitive, which I think is, a great deal of especially younger generations and mine. And you start to realize that the power's in the question. It's in asking. And in fact, it's harder to get a no than you might realize, which is its own realization. But the idea is that, like, people need exposure therapy to negotiation. That's what they need. You have to actually do it. And so it's just a way of aligning their interest in grades by saying, hey, this is an assignment. If you don't get a no, you get marked down, right? So it's about trying to work with what you got and jujitsu that into something that you think is actually good life learning. So incredible experience. I love it. And I don't think it's sustainable for a practitioner. That many students at that pay, we have another kind of systemic issue in terms of how do you keep good people when we know that there's a private sector here where, your semester salary could be made in a single day.
Right.
And especially speaking personally, where I'm coming from, like, still having student loans and building my business, it's not tenable, and that sucks. And it's shitty to say like, hey, like, next generation kids, I love working with you, but I just can't because of like purely opportunity cost things. And I'm excited I loved teaching. I'm excited to do it again later in my career. And right now it's a ton of work, without a teaching assistant and with 34 kids. And yeah, and also the expectation of a class instead of a workshop or working group. But, I have to flip that around to the two of you, and Aram, you in particular. What is teaching like for you?
So I would agree that teaching is a passion, first and foremost, right? And you have to balance it. I think that practitioners who can teach, because I think teaching does take skill, and that was part of my aim in the question. I wanted to get to, what are you learning as you teach stuff? Because it is a little different than as we practice things. So I think the two complement each other really well. And in an ideal world, you'd have a foot in each, a little practicing, a little teaching. And I do think teaching over a term also, and I'd be curious to get your take on this, it feels significantly different than when you go in to do a 1 or 2 or 3 day training, corporately, right? It feels much different because you're developing this relationship with your students over a much broader time. And you've got these assignments that help, kind of force them. And I'm with you on, I hate grading as well, and being driven by the grade. And those activities can also force reflection, right? You've got that ability. I don't know, thoughts, kind of reactions to that, and Nolan, jump in there.
I'll let y'all two continue this conversation. As I'm the only one here that's not an academic professor. So
they let me do it. So, no, but I do think, generally speaking, I think we should have a bit more cynicism of positional power to some degree, right? Just because someone is a professor, things are relational, things are network driven if you're in the same space long enough. So I think I was someone who graduated from college and still thought that we lived in a meritocracy. So I think it's important that we not lie to people to some degree and say, like, yes, you need to work hard, and yes, the cream will rise to the top, and also get networking to some degree. So there's that. In response to Aram, I agree. I think the biggest blessing, aside from the more organic relationship between teacher and student, is the amount of time you have to get to understand someone and learn someone, to read their reflections, to think about, to notice how they show up in different spaces and to tailor accordingly. I'm a big fan of Larry Suskind's Built to Win, which rightly criticizes one-off trainings. And of course, I think we all do one-off trainings, but generally speaking, it kind of goes back to the family idea, which is you can train one family member, right? But if the whole system isn't on the same page, it's going to fall right back into it. And that what is it? A good person loses to a bad system. So unless you have like full leadership buy-in from my perspective, these trainings can be nice and people can get great things from them. But generally speaking, you want for meaningful behavioral change to have more than, 1 to 3 to 5 days.
And see, Nolan, that's where I was going to say, even though you haven't taught, I know you've shared that exact same sentiment based on our own experiences together. And Max, you go back to the family piece, absolutely true, right? I mean, you can make a correction, you can have a teaching moment with a child, and if you don't address the environment around, best case is it has no effect. Worst case is it actually has a negative effect because the hypocrisy is now crept in, and it's like, why are you teaching one thing, right? And I know we see that with some of the corporate work we do, and we all do the one-off trainings. It's really the adoption, and I agree. Built to Win is the book that gets to this, right? And our colleague Danny Ertel years ago also wrote an HBR piece about negotiations corporate capability. It talks about the soup to nuts sort of approach, holistic, right? How are we addressing processes, and how are we addressing how we reward and incentivize and measure people on KPIs, and how do we exchange information between different business units? And it's that collective investment that is really going to have an impact on how negotiation affects ROI, regardless of how you measure your ROI.
Yeah. And just nerding out with the literature. And speaking of Ertel, so I have that as assigned reading. And also I think Point of the Deal, Ertel and Gordon, is fantastic in that it talks about the idea that like, okay, the incentives for the people to close a deal may not be aligned with the people who have to deal with the downstream effects, which also then kind of gets into mediation as well, or just generally that negotiation is primarily about process and not what you're saying, but how you're saying it and how you're structuring it. And I think in some ways it's kind of obvious that people have different and not always aligned incentives in an organization. And it comes as news to people when you start to look in your own organization and say, okay, are the people that are pushing for a deal the same people that are invested in the partnership, the relationship, and delivery? Maybe, but maybe not.
Well, let's bring this back before we move on. Let's bring it back to your students.
Yes.
Any wins? Without getting specific, but as you finish up this first term, any sort of wins in learning and observations because of the time that you get with them, and the ability to provide feedback and teach through other means like grading and that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. The biggest win that I felt that I had was shifting the idea of the classroom and who had power in the classroom, meaning that I often put them in situations where they needed to negotiate with each other or me. And so I took something because I was in Bob Bordone's section of Harvard Negotiation Workshop. And after a few months where you're getting, kind of sure of yourself, you're like, yeah, I'm a Harvard negotiator, I can do this. He has you do something where you're just figuring out a scheduling conflict amongst all the students to sign up for this with IPS, interpersonal skills. And so I did something like that with my class where I said, okay, can you first just tell me what are some good pieces of advice in running a multi-party negotiation? So I go to the board, I write down everything they say, process, set an agenda, negotiate how you're going to negotiate, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'm like, okay, go do it. And it just descends into chaos and positional stuff. And, the curiosity goes out the window. And then, and then kind of just taking a step back once they've kind of concluded the negotiation, just saying, all this stuff. You know what to do, but you didn't do it here. Can you talk to me about that? And for me, I saw a few people have the type of moment that I had in terms of this like very humbling experience that the parts of that knowledge and understanding are stored in different parts of our brain, right? That knowing what to do, this whole performance gap versus what we actually do in the moment. Right. That was definitely a win for me, is to try and give a piece of what I felt like I got in the program of negotiation, which is also a motivator for me to just give a taste of the incredible experience that I had. So that was nice. And, it's, definitely the notes you get at the end of the class are, more rewarding than anything else. So it's definitely a passion. And usually for the engaged students who start to realize that they're negotiating everywhere, they're not just bringing their job offers to you. They're like, hey, I'm actually struggling this semester. Can we talk about that? Like, great. You know, because if I have a student who says, I'm really tired, like I'm feeling sick, I say, great, you don't have to be here. They're like, what are you doing? You don't have to be here. Weigh your interest. You have an alternative. I'm not here to, it's not my interest to have someone who doesn't want to be here to be here. Right. And so, you know, I'm not pushing people out of my class. I do want them to come, but I try and say, like, look, you're negotiating right now. You're giving me time and hopefully attention. But I can definitely say that, you know, conversations around punctuality, electronics, like you got to pick your battles. And, you know, how rigorously do you demand a space of presence in such a way that you would hope to instill in a negotiator that you're training to understand what it's like to sit in silence and what it means to not be able to be distracted and to be there. And to what extent are you just like, okay, it's Wednesday night. This is a 3-hour class. Like, this isn't the battle I'm going to pick.
Hey everyone, Nolan here. I'm going to have to jump in today's podcast for part A of this episode with Max. If you haven't already, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you in next week's part B episode. Hey, thanks for checking out this video on NegotiateX TV. If you found any value at all, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos. And then we also have a couple videos over here that you might be interested in checking out. If you and your small business, your team are looking to get negotiations or leadership training, then you can head over to negotiatex.com and learn more about the coaching services we offer. Thanks, and I'll see you over in the next video.